You do not and you will not learn art by just drawing more. And that's because the brain doesn't care how much information you consume, it cares about how you organize it. We have a core definition that we need to change, and that is studying does not equal learning. Learning equals a change in action or behavior. Your brain doesn't learn new things by just repeating the same old things. It learns when we organize new information properly. You can think of your brain as an extremely clean warehouse that has top-notch janitors that are constantly cleaning the floors of that warehouse. When we're dumping and throwing information onto the floor of that warehouse without stacking it properly, those janitors that are there because of how our biology works are going to swoop in and incinerate that new knowledge almost instantly. The brain is really effective at forgetting information, especially when it's not vital to our information. So trying to memorize how to draw the body or place the muscles on the skeleton doesn't matter to the brain. Because it's not connected to anything, it doesn't matter. It serves no purpose to it. That doesn't necessarily mean that learning art is impossible, because obviously there are plenty of people that have learned how to draw over the years, and some people learned a lot faster than others. And that's because either consciously or unconsciously, they've been learning in a way that their brain really enjoys. And because of that, that information gets instantly stored into the long-term memory. The brain has a certain load capacity, and if we're too low on the pressure that we're putting on the brain, then it doesn't learn anything. You can think of that state as doom scrolling or watching a YouTube video and then also trying to draw from a reference. The brain isn't engaged enough in one particular thing, so all of the information that's coming at it gets thrown away instantly. But then if we put too much pressure on the brain again taps out and doesn't learn anything. But in between these two places, there is a sweet spot where learning becomes effortless. I'm going to demonstrate to you what it feels like to be in that state of effortless flow where your brain is learning, and then what it feels like to overload your brain where you're not able to keep up with what you're learning anymore, and what those two states feel like with a 2-second demonstration. Okay, I'm going to give you a list of numbers, and I want you to add them up so that at the end you have one sum. Okay, 2, 7, 10, 24, 38, 134. Okay, obviously, unless you are a math magician and you're able to add up numbers really quickly, you just felt what it is where your brain is engaged in the information and is able to hold on to it. And then when things go out of your control, out of your understanding, that your brain just taps out and says, well, I can't do this anymore. When our brains enter that state of too much pressure, it purposely starts to forget information very quickly, because we have to remember that the brain is one of the biggest consumers of calories. So the less it has to work, the better for our survival, according to our Homo sapien biology. So to get around this, we need to stay in that sweet spot where we're not overloading our brain with too much information, and we're also not understimulating our brain where we're not engaging it on a single subject. But first we need to find where our individual sweet spot is, because everyone is in a different place on the learning journey. So everyone's sweet spot of learning is going to be slightly different. And we already felt what it was like to enter that state of learning and then exit it by overloading our brain with too much information that we're not ready for with the number example. So if we're going to apply that specifically towards art, we need to start with exactly where you are right now. Let's say you're a beginner artist and you're just picking up the pen for the first time to learn how to draw. It would be controlling the pen and learning how to draw straight lines. Or if you're in the intermediate stage, just in that tutorial hell phase, that would be you learning how to draw 3-dimensional shapes on the page. And then when we find exactly where we are in our journey, we need to find the progression and connect the progression with the knowledge of where we are. And that's the key to getting better at art. Too many times we will go from one subject to the next and progress way too far ahead of where we actually are. And this causes our brain to overload with information that we're not yet ready for. And that's why it feels like you might be able to study and get good at art, but if you take 2 or 3 days off from your drawing, all of a sudden you lose all of that skill, because you're having to grasp and hold on to every piece of information you get without having certainty that it's actually getting stored into the long-term memory. So to use an example of the beginner artist, to connect your information from where you are to where you want to go, it would look like drawing straight lines, getting confidence in getting one line from one place to another, and then adding curves into the line, making those S shapes, and then drawing flat shapes, connecting all the lines to make a circle or make a cube on the page. If you're an intermediate artist, that would look like taking the cubes, taking the cylinders and contorting it, manipulating it so the shapes might match something like a part of the human body. You're connecting your knowledge of learning how to draw basic shapes to learning how to take those shapes and actually apply it to something that you want to be able to draw. And by linking those two pieces of information will now make it so the information actually is organized in your brain and stays there for a longer period of time. The more that you do something, generally, the better that you get at it. But in the art niche, sometimes people think that, okay, if I just draw more, that means I'll get better at drawing. But actually, you just get better at drawing in the specific way that you've been drawing. The learning aspect comes from a different mechanism. So once you've learned how to draw in a different way, we need to now make sure that that new way stays in our brain and we don't go back to old habits. To retain the information and keep that new drawing skill in your brain, we need to apply something called active recall. The super simplified science behind this is that the information that we learned is stored on these little white wires in our brain. And the more that our brain recalls the information that's written on these white wires, the thicker and stronger that they get, and the more that they last, or the longer that they last in our brain. Very similar to how our muscles are built when we put our body under strain. When we enter that strain zone with our brain where it has to actively recall information without help, it builds those white wires to be thicker and stronger, and now they stay there in the brain longer. If you ever learned basic math back in school and you can still remember it to this day without having to study it, it's because you repeated it over and over again and your brain had to recall that information without reading a textbook or looking at any help, which strengthened those white wires to such a degree that they're there forever. And we can do the same thing with art. The way to apply this towards our art is when you do a study session. Let's say you take 30 minutes and you're learning how to draw something specific like the head. After your 30 minutes are done, you take 5 minutes and you put everything down and you go and take a break. But this 5 minutes is very important. Don't overstimulate your brain with distractions. Don't open the phone, don't go through texts, don't go into social media. You have to allow your brain to numb itself. So doing something like a chore or folding the laundry, going for a walk or doing some stretching allows your brain to go into its active rest phase. And when your brain is in that active rest phase, everything that you were doing before in your study session is getting replayed 5 to 10 times faster in the unconscious mind. And this is where the learning starts to happen. So allow your brain to be in that inactive state without distraction for 5 minutes. Then come back and move away all the references, all the guides, and like a science page, write down in physical notes what you learned in those 30 minutes, and then do your diagrams, draw what you learned, almost as if you're going to give a presentation to the class about what it is that you learned to teach the rest of the class. By doing this and having your brain to recall what you had just learned, it's also going to point out to you where your gaps in your knowledge are. This will show you what you have to go back and restudy, because many times in art, we'll study something and we'll think, okay, I have an understanding for this, but then we move on to the next subject and we have a lot of holes and a lot of gaps in our knowledge. So our foundation is very wobbly. So when we're trying to draw the next thing, when we go from basic shapes to drawing anatomy, everything starts to look a little wonky or fall apart because the foundation, which is the shapes, we have a lot of gaps in there. But by doing this active recall, by making it almost like a little science project every time we're finished with our study sessions, our brain shows us what we've actually learned and what we need to go back and do a little bit more studying on. And because now we're making our brain work for that information a little bit more, those white wires inside of our brain are going to become so much more strengthened and the information will stay in there. So you could take off an entire month and come back and still have that same level of drawing skill that you started with. You don't have to wait an entire decade or rely completely on talent to actually get good at your art. You just have to apply the right learning strategies. So when you do put in those hours of studying art, it sticks into your brain. If you want more strategies and techniques on how to apply these kind of learning techniques towards your art so you actually learn what you're drawing within a quick period of time, there's a free ebook down below in the first link in the description. And I'll see you guys in the next one.